Hey people, I've probably made about 20 pens at this point in time, and I've still got a long way to go before I'm really happy with what I've been making. But I realised I've never got around to actually publishing any footage of me making a pen. So I thought, let's get some footage out of me making my first pen, a retrospective look at how I did it, the lessons I've learned, the mistakes I've made. And just to be clear, this is not a tutorial on how to make a pen. There's plenty of great tutorials out there by other turners. That said, I might make another one at some point. So for now, just take a look, see what I did, and enjoy. Well, people say that you should keep your first pen so you can track how you improve. I thought I'm going to make so many badly made pens to refer to, so my first pen needed to be for a chap that I work with who's given me loads of scrap wood. Most recently he's given me some holly, so I thought I'd make a great pen blank from that. So I set about looking for a suitable piece to cut down. To make the wood more manageable, I cut it down on my Evolution miter saw. I then used my bandsaw and cut the holly down to some nice pen blanks, sized around 25 by about 120 millimeters. I made enough blanks here to do a few attempts just in case the first went wrong. I took a set of these blanks and used my drill press and a screw clamp to keep the blank in place while I drilled out a 7mm hole for each of the brass tubes to go up inside. Now, the pen kits were slimline twist roller balls that I'd been gifted from a member of the YouTube makers community, Dave Gunner, fantastic chap. And he's generously given me these and some micro mesh pads, which you'll see in a bit, so I can start making my pen making journey. I'll pop a link to his channel in the video description. The brass tubes from the kit had to be inserted into the blanks with superglue. Now, I found the first few times I did this quite stressful, as you only have a limited amount of time before the glue dries, and if it sets while you're halfway into the blank, you could ruin both the tube and the blank. Great care must be taken not to get any of the glue on the inside of the tube, or even worse, on your hand, because this can be a real problem. I've since come up with a little pen insert tool that can be 3D printed to make this job a little bit less stressful, and I'll pop a download link in the description of this video for this. With the brass tubes inserted, I then squared off the ends with my barrel trimmer tool. Now, I had no idea the first time around as how far to cut this down, but I've since learned how much I need to cut. The brass is soft enough that you might not actually be able to tell that you're shaving bits off, so quick visual checks are needed along the way. Now, I found that when the brass goes from dull to having a tiny bit of shine on the edges, it's done. I've also learned that while this pen was okay, I should wait a few minutes from going to the glue up of the tubes to the barrel trimming, as the heat and the force from the barrel trimmer tool can cause a brass tube to slip a bit if the glue isn't fully dry. The pen blanks, once done, were mounted onto my pen mandrel, which again was kindly given to me by another awesome maker in the YouTube maker community, Paul Willmore, and I'll pop a link to his channel in the description as well. I've not used the mandrel before, but I've read lots of advice on how to mount it up, along with warnings about not compressing it too much, so you might not, bend the rod. So this fitted together relatively easy with some steel bushings sized for my pen kits, and I fitted it into the lathe with no issues. The square pen blanks had to, first of all, of course, be made round, so I opted to use my 1-inch roughing gouge for this. Now, I thought this sort of size of tool could be a bit overkill for pens, but speaking to some other pen makers, the larger tools actually have advantages, especially at this point with quickly turning square stock to round. Now, I did this and all the finishing at the lathe's slowest speed. Now, the finishing needs to be slow to avoid the heat build-up, of course, but I probably could have gone a bit faster with the turning. I just didn't want to risk it until I'm a little bit more experienced. Plus, I don't have a variable speed lathe, so changing pulleys is a big faff. Once satisfied with the round and the bulk of the material removed, I switched to my skew chisel for the rest of the work. I used slicing cuts to get the wood down as close as I dare to the bushings. I've learnt since that I can go pretty close to the bushing, but having too large a gap from being too cautious is apparently a fairly normal thing for people new to turning pens. Now, I'm now using a record power 3/4 inch round skew chisel to do this part on my pens, and I'm spending a little bit more time with the roughing gouge, so hardly any work is needed with the skew, and I'm finding it so much better. The pens were made only slightly curved on each half, as I don't like the large curves that you find on some people's pens. Once all the turning was complete, I removed the tool rest, as I've seen enough turning videos to know that this was extremely important for safety, so I set about going up the grits with sandpaper. I started at 60, moved to 80, 120, and then finally at 240. At 240 grit, I then added some sanding sealer and then gave the wood another light sand with 240 grit paper before moving on to the Yorkshire grit. Now, I've known since, thanks to a little tip by Paul Lockwood, that the Yorkshire grit will actually partly act as a sanding sealer, so I can actually completely miss using the sanding sealer step. I've also learnt that using cotton rag should not be used, as it's possible it could get caught up, so now I only use kitchen tissue, which seems to be okay. The Yorkshire grit was added in generous amounts and slowly removed with a cloth. I then broke out the micro mesh pads that David Gunner had given me and moved up the grits from 1,500 all the way up to 12,000. The pads were given a quick bathe in water in between uses, and each pad was used slightly longer than the last. The pen now felt pretty smooth, but I wanted to give it a little bit of protection, so I opted for using some CA glue, as I've seen this used as a popular finish, and then I used a wax coating afterwards. Now I'm using plastic polish on the cyanoacrylate and giving the wax a miss, although I may use this again if I try some other finishes such as boiled linseed oil. And a friend of mine also recommended trying melamine lacquer as well, so I'm going to start giving that a go and see how it comes out. Now the CA was poured onto the wood very liberally, and while I think the coating probably gave the pen some nice protection, it didn't give it the shine that comes from multiple layers. So I now use a tiny piece of tissue just to wipe on the glue as the lathe is running, let it dry, and then repeat for 4 or 5 layers, and that build-up of layers is what really gives it its shine. Now once the glue was added, I put on a layer of wax, but again, in hindsight this was a little bit redundant, but it just felt right at the time. I then removed the pen mandrel from the lathe and took it over to my workbench for assembly. The large amount of glue I had used made taking the pen parts off the mandrel and away from the bushings a little tricky, so I had to use a bit of force. The glue also caused some mess on the edges of the blanks, so each end needed a little sand as well. With no pen press, I had to use one of my clamps to assemble the pen, and while this worked okay, it was a little fiddly process, and I was worried the whole time about destroying my work so far. Now I'm using an arbor press as recommended by a friend of mine, John Clothiers, and I'm finding this absolutely brilliant. Plus you can use it for so many other things. Okay, so the nib goes on first of all. Then the pen mechanism. Now I've messed up a few pens at this point by accidentally going too far, but this one was okay. Then I did the end cap with the clip, fitted the centre band and pushed the two parts together. And voila! A working pen, the first of many. The finished pen done, I left it on my work friend's desk with a note on how it was made, and this is something I'd love to do alongside any pen or indeed anything I end up selling, because I think it would really complete the experience of buying something handmade. So my work friend was chuffed to bits with the pen, and I was pretty damn proud of it too. My first pen turned out okay. Sure, there's loads of room for improvement, and even now, I'm 20 pens down the line, and I'm way away from being satisfied, but I think pretty soon I'll be at the point where I could sell these and feel happy with them. You can also see that it's the kindness of other makers in the community that have helped me not only gear up to make these pens, but as well as giving me loads of advice on how to do it properly. So if you like this video, please click on like. If you haven't subscribed to the channel already, click on subscribe and ring the little notification bell and you'll be told about any new videos that I come up with. And if you have any comments, any thoughts and advice, maybe even on the pen making, please pop them in the comments below. I'll try and read everything there. So thanks for watching everyone. Have a good night.